Welcome to the WAM Research Award Summit, celebrating the power of research by honoring 6 scientists making a difference for women's brains. We'll hear from them and from the founder of the Women's Alzheimer's Movement, activist and award-winning journalist Maria Shriver. From the director of the Office of Research on Women's Health at the NIH, Dr. Janine Clayton, and from today's moderator, best-selling author, CNN chief medical correspondent, and neurosurgeon, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. But first, a reminder that behind every story of Alzheimer's is one of love for family and hope for the future of science. Here is Tara Hicks.
Hi, I'm Tara Hicks. I'm a daughter of Alzheimer's. My mother was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's at 54. I was 28 at that time, and I just remember being in the doctor's office and hearing them tell us life as we knew it would never be the same. We did everything together. We worked out together. We went on trips together. We tried new activities, golfed, belly dancing. We went on double dates together. We did everything you do with your best friend. And now, 6 years later, that's all a memory of the past. She's the same person, but trapped inside this unfamiliar body, where she's unable to communicate, the words don't come out, and even her basic living needs she has had to be fully dependent on caregivers for. There is no magic pill to cure this disease, at least not yet. And that's why I'm here. I just want to spend a few minutes acknowledging the scientists whom the Women's Alzheimer's Movement supports. They are working hard to find a cure to end this devastating disease, because it's research and science that are going to help turn the tide on Alzheimer's. Your support of WAM would help future generations avoid developing this devastating disease. I hope I am one of the daughters who will be spared from Alzheimer's, and I hope you'll be by my side as we work to change the future.
Go Sanjay.
Hey everybody, I'm Sanjay Gupta, and I am thrilled to be here. This is such an important discussion we're about to have, and I just want to, first of all, just thank Tara Hicks for sharing that story. I was really moved by looking at those images, and her mom was diagnosed at just age 54. And it's a story that I think for a lot of people watching right now, in some ways, will feel familiar. It'll feel familiar because either you know somebody who has dealt with this, you're learning about Alzheimer's, maybe you worry about it yourself. We know that dealing with Alzheimer's can cause a lot of pain for people. So again, Tara, thank you so much for sharing that story. I got to tell you, I think about this a lot as a physician, someone who has been studying the brain for 25 years now, but also as a family member. My grandfather had Alzheimer's. I was in my early teens when this happened, and he was sort of the favorite family member, and we were very, very close. And when he started to have difficulties, I remember, as a young person at that point, trying to figure it out. I was a little confused by what was happening to him. He would tell jokes that I thought maybe we weren't quite let in on yet, and things started to make less and less sense. And I remember the look of confusion that would cross his face at times. And it was tough. I think it's tough, again, as a family member, seeing anybody that you love go through this. But you couldn't help but think as well that if this is my grandfather, what are the chances that I'll see this in my own parents? What are the chances that I may one day be dealing with this, or that my kids will be dealing with this? And in part, that's what sort of ignited my longstanding love affair with the brain, trying to understand it better and do everything I can to help educate people nowadays about what Alzheimer's is, what's going on in the brain. And I think most importantly, as we're going to talk about today, what can be done about it for men and for women who are predominantly affected by this. I've spent so much time over the last year talking about COVID. We've all been affected by COVID, and the numbers are I mean, they're mind-numbing to think about. I never imagined that we would be in the position that we are right now with COVID. And I think that there's a lesson in there that extends beyond just this pandemic. And that is that we should not wait for things to be smacking us in the face before we start to do something about it. How do we apply world-class research? How do we prepare ourselves mentally to actually focus on preparation for things, as opposed to waiting till things get to some critical status? And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today as well. We know that there are nearly 6 million Americans currently living with Alzheimer's. We know, I'm sure everyone who's on at this meeting today knows that those numbers are expected to potentially triple by the year 2050. We also know that two out of three people who are diagnosed are women. It's an astounding thing. They are women, and despite that, women are often wildly underrepresented in the trials on Alzheimer's disease. How does that happen? We are going to talk to researchers today who are focusing on this, helping answer this critical question of what is happening in the brain and why so many people who are developing Alzheimer's are women. And I got to tell you, the person who really educated me about this, after some long conversations, she's been educating, I think, all of us for a long time, is a woman. She is someone who is determined to change the story of Alzheimer's, change the course of it, but change the story of it as well, because sometimes the stigma and the way we think about things gets in the way of actually getting things done. She's an incredible person. I am very, very honored to call her a friend as well. She's a fellow journalist, one of the great storytellers of our time, Maria Shriver, a true Alzheimer's warrior. Hi, Maria.
Thank you. Hi, Sanjay. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, and thank you for your own personal story. I just want to say Sanjay has this new book out. It's called Keep Sharp, Build a Better Brain at Any Age, and he and I have spoken about this book. It's already a big bestseller, but I urge you, if you haven't gotten it, to get it, because it does talk about what we're talking about today. It talks about our brain. It talks about prevention. And it, as he says, featuring a simple 12-week program to keep yourself sharp. And that is what we all want to do, right? Especially people, boomers at my age, who are really concerned about the numbers. When you talk about the Alzheimer's epidemic, when you talk about the COVID epidemic, those of us in the Alzheimer's space have been saying, hey, we're already in an epidemic when it comes to Alzheimer's. Talk to any of the people, the 17 million caregivers who are working around the clock, while also working, taking care of children, they're taking care of parents, they're risking their own health. They think they're in an epidemic just like COVID. And so kind of funding research, pushing people to research, that's the goal of the Women's Alzheimer's Movement. And that's why I'm so happy to be talking on this International Day of Science, where we talk about women and girls, but to talk about researchers, to laud them. They often kind of work away in these smaller labs. They work away from the spotlight, and the work they do transforms our lives and the lives of people that we love. And just like your work, Sanjay, on the camera and off the camera does that. And I'm so glad that you're here to help us today to talk about these incredible researchers and what they're trying to do, because what they're trying to do is bring us answers in real time that will help us in real time. And this whole area, this whole space, in the years that I've been involved, my dad was diagnosed in 2003. And as a journalist, I started writing books, doing reports, doing films, doing documentaries, all trying to answer, like, what is this disease? Why do we know so little? Why isn't everybody else talking about it? I don't want to get it. Why is it women? And I think it's so exciting to be where we are today, talking about prevention, talking about lifestyle, talking about hormones, talking about diabetes, and trying to connect the dots in our world.
Yeah, no doubt. And, you know, I got to say, Maria, that we're in for a treat tonight. And you know, when I was writing the book, the people who you're going to hear from in a little bit, in some ways, I felt like I was just acting as a translator for their incredible work. And I'm really excited that they're going to be talking about some of that. I won't spoil the surprise. You're going to meet them in just a couple of minutes. I always wanted to ask you something, Maria, just really quickly.
Yeah.
You know, because you are such a storyteller, the thing that you just said, that we all know how significant this is, Alzheimer's, especially if you've dealt with this in your own family. You hear the numbers, maybe people will hear the financial cost of this. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think actually gets through? Because we spend a lot of money in this country on all sorts of different things. Given the urgency of what is happening with Alzheimer's, neurodegenerative diseases in general, what do you think, you know, from a storytelling or advocacy standpoint, really resonates?
Well, I think the prevention message, I think the idea that we can now learn more and see more about the brain, and that perhaps this isn't just a foregone conclusion. Perhaps there is something that I can do in my life right now that will keep my brain sharp, like you write about, that may prevent Alzheimer's. I think for so long, when I got involved in the Alzheimer's space, and so many of these other researchers have been in it longer than I have, there was just kind of doom and gloom around this disease. It was like, there's nothing going to work. There's nothing you can do. Right. Now we have people, as we're going to talk today, looking at diet, looking at lifestyle, looking at the connection between sugar. And we have much more of an awareness of the brain. We have people, particularly young people, a lot of young people talking about brain fatigue, talking about focus, talking about wanting to live different kinds of lives. And I think we also have more people getting older in this country. So we're in many ways having a perfect storm, I think. But I don't think Alzheimer's gets the attention, the funding, the wave that it really deserves, the numbers. I think people have a complicated relationship with aging. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about Alzheimer's. Many people feel like, well, it's just something that inevitably happens, and I'm going to get it at 90 and I'll worry about it then. So I think this is a storytelling job for all of us who are here today to talk about the realities of it and to push the story and to look at aging in a new way as well. That's what we're trying to do. I just did that for the governor here in California, looking at aging in a different way.
I think it's so important, and also to celebrate these successes too. So it's not all gloom and doom, like you're saying. Yeah. And speaking of which, you know, we were just talking about medical research being almost entirely done on men, and largely white men at that. The NIH, as you know, Maria, the NIH now finally directed to include women in every research study from 2015 on. Very good news. It means that we got a lot of catch up to do, given that 2 out of 3 cases of Alzheimer's are women. And I think it's important to hear from somebody who's really been at the forefront of this, someone from the Office of Research on Women's Health.
Janine Clayton.
Janine Clayton. I think you're with us, Janine. Welcome. So good to have you here.
Great to be here with you, Sanjay and Maria. Great to see you again. It's so important that we talk about all of these issues. And of course, we need women in every single study, especially in diseases like Alzheimer's. Like you said, Maria, we're seeing more and more women with Alzheimer's, and it's not just because they live longer than men, but we don't really understand beneath that, right?
Amen, amen. That was a big story that I found myself pushing up against a lot of kind of very well-known doctors saying it was just because women live longer. I think, Dr. Clayton, most people don't understand how far back our research on women really is. Where are we today when it comes to research on women and Alzheimer's? So the people listening today, what can they learn about the status of where we are?
So we've come a long way, and now we do see half of the participants in NIH-supported studies are women, but it wasn't always that way. So we are behind. We know less about women. We know less about female biology because we just haven't studied it as long or as much. So we're trying to catch up now by having male and female animals in the animal studies and men and women in every study, every clinical study. But there's so much to learn, and we still have a ways to go.
I'm wondering if there's anything that you can enlighten us with, because, as Maria pointed out, and again, we had this conversation, it's not just because women live longer, which was a common sort of, I think, myth, a misconception, I should say, out there. I remember, Dr. Clayton, years ago, a study that was looking at using progesterone in people who had head injuries. And the idea was that there was some evidence that perhaps women who had a similar head injury as compared to a man did better, their outcomes were better. So if you gave progesterone to people, would that be protective? And I know that that's a different sort of pathology, but I'm just wondering, what are you finding? What is the focus right now of the research at the NIH?
So you mentioned particular hormone, progesterone. So we are, of course, looking at all different kinds of hormone, estrogen, the role of estrogen, progesterone, and others. But we're also looking at the proteins, amyloid and tau, as you know, and the pathology that you see, those tangles, those neurofibrillary tangles. We're looking at brain waves. We're looking at all the ways you can image the brain and to see how active different parts of the brain are, glucose metabolism of the brain. We're even looking at whether visual impairment is an early sign of cognitive decline and might be able to help us to understand some of the pathology.
Dr. Clayton, so many women, I would say my own age, when I go to the doctor's office, this is something I was talking to Dr. Britton about, the doctors that I'm seeing haven't caught up to what's going on in the research labs. How can NIH and how can you guys do a better job educating the doctors on the ground who are actually seeing women who are making these kind of life and death decisions about hysterectomies, about hormones, that may be saving their brains, but they're getting information from NIH that might be old. How can you bring us better up to date?
So there are all kinds of ways that we put out new studies. We have news releases when new studies come out. And I think that's important for all of our colleagues that see patients every day to follow those, like you said, closely. And we know that looking at treatment outcomes by sex for men and for women separately is a key way for us to learn if we see differences by sex. So that would be one question every clinician can ask. Was there a difference by sex in anything they read?
But how can the patient educate themselves about what's new, what's current?
Absolutely. The National Institute on Aging has a wide variety of resources on their website. So NIA, that's the National Institute on Aging. And I would encourage every single person to take information that you learn from trusted resources like NIH to your doctor and ask questions. Write those questions down before you go so you have them right in front of you and ask questions. And then the other thing I always say to women especially, if you think something's not right with your body, speak up. You are your own best advocate for your own health, and make sure that you speak up and say something's not right.
Dr. Clayton, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clayton.
Thank you for being here. And Maria, I'm glad you raised that last point. It can be hard just to find knowledge that you trust. I mean, it's incredible. Again, I guess this speaks to the larger point that you're raising and why you've started this movement. But on something as significant as this, why should it be so hard to find knowledge that you trust? And it's a question we're going to put to 6 researchers whose out of the box thinking, their creative thinking, their innovative work, I think is the reason that they are the recipients of the 2020 WAM research grants. I know many of these people. I am lucky to know them. They have extensive and impressive lists of credentials, I will tell you as well. So we're going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves.
I am Dr. Lisa Mosconi. I am the founder and director of the Weill Cornell Women's Brain Initiative.
I am Dr. Roberta Diaz-Brinton, here at the Center for Innovation in Brain Science at the University of Arizona.
Hi, I'm Dr. Dean Ornish. I'm the founder and president of the nonprofit Preventive Medicine Research Institute and a clinical professor of medicine at UCSF.
I'm Dr. Ashley Sanderlin, an instructor in the Department of Internal Medicine, Section on Gerontology and Geriatric Medicine at Wake Forest School of Medicine.
I'm Dr. Richard Isaacson, director of the Alzheimer's Prevention Clinic at Weill Cornell Medicine and New York Presbyterian.
I'm Lori Cox with the Department of Neurology at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and I'm so thrilled to be one of this year's WAM grant recipients. I'm excited to join you all this evening at an event honoring the power of research.
Congratulations to all of you. That's terrific.
Yeah, congratulations. I love this, Sanjay, because we got so many applications, and obviously we raise money throughout the year so that we can fund these grant recipients, but there's so many others out there that obviously we couldn't fund, but we wanted to focus on kind of news you can use. And these incredible researchers are all studying things that we hope will help people in real time.
Yeah, it's incredible, and I'm anxious to ask some questions. I got to say, you guys all look great. I mean, we all live in this Zoom world now, and I expected at least one thing to go off wrong in some way, but here we are. It's going well so far. Bunch of brain docs. So,
there you go.
Ashley Sanderlin, congratulations on your award. I'm really interested in diet. I just think it's interesting. You know, we nourish our bodies, we nourish our brains, we think about our diets all the time. You've talked a lot. I was reading about some of your work about a keto diet. What do you hope to really learn about the connection between this type of diet and sleep specifically? And what do you think the relevance will be for the average person out there?
Thank you. Yes, the keto diet is, we use in our studies a modified Mediterranean ketogenic diet. And so we're interested to see how diet impacts sleep health and whether reducing the carbs, which we could all do every now and then, how that helps us with a good night's sleep. And so we're most focused on the impact of diet using ketones in place of glucose to help improve brain function.
And so there's two things in there: improving brain function and improving sleep. Can you talk us through that? As you point out, we could all probably stand to reduce our carbs. We eat way too many carbs in this country, and frankly, most of the developed world. But what is the relationship to sleep? And then is sleep specifically the relationship to brain function, or are these two separate things you're talking about?
So in relation to brain function and sleep, how it relates to the ketogenic diet, what we've seen in the past is that a ketogenic diet is something that it changes the way the brain works. When we reduce carbs, keto diets, they cause our brains to increase more inhibitory signaling, which we think helps to reduce the accumulation of beta amyloid in those who have MCI or Alzheimer's disease, because inhibitory signaling reduces this neural firing that can become out of whack as we go into cognitive impairment. And so the reduction in that neural signaling, we've also seen in previous research, seems to also help people with their REM and deep sleep stage time, the time that they spend in those sleep stages. And so what we're interested in people who have a cognitive impairment, does changing their diet impact their brain function in a positive way, reducing the neural firing so that beta amyloid does not accumulate at a rate that we would not want to see? And then does it also help them get a better night's sleep or reduce the amount of, increase the amount of time they spend in REM and deep sleep stages, which are important for memory consolidation?
And
go
ahead. Sorry.
No, go, Sanjay, go.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're talking about not only potentially short-term benefits, but also longer-term protection as well?
Yes, that is what we're studying. Our clinical trial, it's a 4-month study. So participants are on a modified Mediterranean ketogenic diet for 4 months. And we test even after that to see if there are longer-term effects.
I think what's so interesting, Sanjay, about what Ashley's talking about is that these are things that we can implement now. We weren't talking 5 years ago, 10 years ago about diet. And
Right.
So when we talk about diet, when we talk about sleep, and when I talk to people, they're like prioritizing sleep, the connection to that, to the brain. So these are kind of empowering things.
Intentional with our sleep. So oftentimes we give all of our energy and our intentions throughout our day, but we let sleep kind of fall by the wayside. And so our sleep hygiene, or the habits that we have related to sleep, are very important, not just for our body health, but for our brain health as well.
Okay, let's talk to Roberta Britton. Dr. Britton has been a long time researcher, has looked at women for decades. We funded her many times. In the past, she looked at tamoxifen, she's looked at menopause, she's looked at estrogen. And I'm really excited because right now she's going to look at type 2 diabetes and the connection between that and Alzheimer's. And Robbie, I think this is so exciting because there's so many people dealing with diabetes, so many people, particularly boomers, on the verge of type 2 diabetes, and nobody talks to them about the connection between that and perhaps Alzheimer's. So are you saying like sugar and Alzheimer's go together, wipe it out, and you have a fighting chance?
So, so sugar, actually the brain requires glucose, right? It requires the right amount of glucose. And part of what happens during menopause for women is that there's a change in the energy system of the brain to utilize glucose as its primary fuel. When we think about, the brain and glucose, the brain is a Hummer. It's an energy hog. Right. It weighs 2% of the body weight and consumes 20% of the fuel. So from here to here, we're a Hummer. From here down, we're a Prius. And that can actually put the brain at risk. Type 2 diabetes, a dysfunction in glucose metabolism, can put the brain at risk because it's primarily dependent on glucose. And so when you dysregulate, you have a problem with glucose metabolism, the brain is actually the first organ to probably be affected. So maintaining proper glucose metabolism really benefits the brain function and brain health. So our question for this year's Women's Alzheimer's Movement Project is to really ask the question, that experiment called medical care, doctors, has actually been going on for a number of years, decades. And we can now ask the question, do the therapies utilized for type 2 diabetes, what's the impact on the risk of Alzheimer's later in life? We know that type 2 diabetes is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. Do the therapies that are being utilized for type 2 diabetes, what's the impact on risk of developing Alzheimer's disease later in life? And I want to just give a sneak peek. It's looking promising, right? There are differences in therapeutic efficacy in preventing Alzheimer's disease, reducing the risk of Alzheimer's disease, but we're pretty excited about the progress on the project. And let me say something a little bit about that communication that Dr. Clayton was referring to. We publish all of our women's Alzheimer's movement and as much of our National Institute on Health published research in open science, open access, so that physicians and women and patients can access that knowledge freely. Essentially, it's the way that we can communicate directly from us to you.
Right. Dr. Britton, so for anybody out there right now who's watching this summit, and there are thousands of people who joined here today, let's just say they have type 2 diabetes or they're on the cusp of it. And nobody's spoken to them about how that might make them more susceptible to Alzheimer's. What should be their takeaway? What should they go to their doctor and say? Should they be on metformin? Should they be on a keto diet? What should they be doing right now? I know you're studying this, but what are some things they could take away today?
So I think a couple of takeaways. One is if there is a history of type 2 diabetes in your family, to be very, very conscious of that and to discuss those therapeutic options. The other is we can all purchase a glucose blood monitor, right? And do our own glucose testing at home in the morning when we wake up at fasting blood glucose. And keeping our weight in check, right? So a big challenge for women in the menopause is weight gain. And that's because the brain has switched, to a different system of fuel. And Dr. Mosconi will talk about that in a moment. But essentially, that menopausal transition is, in many respects, two things: a glucose metabolism transition, and it's a neurological transition. We think about it as reproduction, but it's really so much around brain function. And part
I think that's so interesting. I want to just throw it over to Sanjay, but I just want to say, as a woman who went through menopause, no one ever spoke to me about it being a neurological transition. No one ever spoke to me about what Robbie's talking about or what Lisa talked about, which is why I think these things are so important in connecting the dots, how educated you have to be. So we'll come back to you, but I know Sanjay, you're going to talk to Dean.
Yeah, we'll definitely come back to that topic and just how we think about glucose and our diet overall and the impact on our brains. Dr. Dean Ornish, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
You know, I've known Dean for a long time, and I've been following your work around cardiac disease initially, and the idea that so much of what we think about with regard to cardiac disease can be addressed and maybe even reversed. And we all talk about our own families. You know, I had heart disease in my family as well, and I kept feeling like it was this thing that I was preordained to have. And it was just very inspiring to talk to you, Dean, about what was possible. We more recently started talking again about the idea that some of those same lifestyle modifications could slow down, and I dare use the word even reverse. I'm curious what you're going to say about this, but maybe even slow down or reverse early onset Alzheimer's. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your research, these studies, and how rigorous and realistic the lifestyle changes are for the average person.
Sure. Well, it's always great to have an excuse to talk with you. And Maria, I want to thank you and everyone that works with you for the opportunity to be here today, which I'm deeply grateful for. So Sanjay, as you indicated, what's good for your heart is good for your brain. I'm currently conducting the first randomized trial to see whether intensive lifestyle changes that we found could reverse heart disease, type 2 diabetes, early stage prostate cancer, lengthen telomeres, change gene expression, could also stop or even reverse the progression of early stage Alzheimer's disease. These changes include a whole foods plant-based diet that's low in fat and sugar, moderate exercise, meditation and other yoga-based stress management techniques, and support groups or psychosocial support, or to reduce it to its essence, as Maria likes to do, to eat well, to move more, stress less, and love more. That's it. And I think we're at a place with Alzheimer's very reminiscent, as you indicate, Sanjay, of where we were 43 years ago when I began doing studies on heart disease. In other words, back then, the less intensive lifestyle interventions could slow down the rate at which your arteries got clogged, but it was thought impossible that you could stop or reverse it. We found, like ounce of prevention, pound of cure, that moderate changes can slow the rate at which you get worse. More intensive changes, we were able to show for the first time, could actually reverse it, and much more quickly than we had thought possible. And I think we're at a place with Alzheimer's very reminiscent of where we were with heart disease back then. In other words, like then, the less intensive lifestyle interventions, the finger study from Finland, which is going to be reproduced here, is called the Pointer study. The MIND study showed that less intensive lifestyle changes could slow the rate at which people got sick, got dementia. Our hypothesis is that more intensive changes might actually stop or reverse it. And I published a book called Undo It with my wife, Ann, that put forth this unifying theory that, why is it that these same lifestyle changes can affect so many different diseases? And I think it's because they're really not so different from each other. I think that, I was trained like you were to view heart disease and diabetes and prostate cancer and Alzheimer's as being fundamentally different diseases, different diagnoses, and different treatments. But I really think they have a lot more in common than they have differently. And that's why you often find, is like you talked about in your family, that the same person might have heart disease and early stage Alzheimer's and type 2 diabetes and have high cholesterol and high blood pressure and obesity and so on, because these comorbidities are just different manifestations of the same underlying disease process. And as far as how practical these approaches are, Medicare created a new benefit category to cover my program for reversing heart disease 10 years ago. And we have data on well over 15,000 people who've gone through it. It's a 72-hour program. It's the same program that we found that can reverse heart disease that we're now studying for heart disease. And 94% of the people complete the 72 hours of the program, and 85 to 90% of the people are still following it years later. So we have this idea that simple changes are easy and big changes are hard, but sometimes actually big changes are easier because these underlying biological mechanisms are so dynamic. Most people feel so much better so quickly. It reframes the reason for making lifestyle changes from preventing something bad from happening years down the road to feeling better now, and how quickly you can feel better when you make these changes to the degree you make them.
I've seen some of these lifestyle changes. So I've actually had the opportunity to visit with some of the people within the research trial. But I wonder if you could just briefly describe some of them. You say, move more, love more, eat less, but it's a specific diet, and there's other things that sort of go along with it. 72 hours over what period of time, and what does it entail?
Well, that's for reversing heart disease. That's what Medicare and other insurance companies are covering. But in our program, we're meeting with people 3 times a week for 4 hours at a time. They get an hour of stress management, meditation, and so on, an hour of a support group, which is incredibly important because, Alzheimer's, as you know, is such an inherently isolating experience. You like, what was that person's name? And where do I leave my glasses or my keys? And you don't want to go out because you don't want to embarrass yourself. And next thing you know, the doctor's saying, I'm sorry, you've got Alzheimer's, and all we can do is slow it down, but we can't really stop it and reverse it. And by the way, we're going to take away your driver's license now, so your world shrinks even more. And so putting people in a support group, not just to help them stay on the diet, but creating a safe environment for people to really talk openly and authentically about what's really going on in their lives is incredibly meaningful and powerful and healing. So anyway, I have an hour of exercise, an hour with a support group, an hour of stress management, and an hour of a lecture. And we do that 3 times a week. Now, we were meeting in person, but a year ago, because of COVID, we had to virtualize the intervention. We're doing it all by Zoom now. And so that gives us the opportunity now to collaborate with other centers. We're still recruiting people for the study. So if anyone's listening to this and they're interested, just go to mynameornish.com and there's information on that. But Sanjay, you visited the study, and I'm just curious if you can talk about some of the stories that you heard while you were there.
Yeah, I know. The stories are they're pretty remarkable. First of all, just to hear people talk about their own experiences, just like you were mentioning, the first signs that they may be having difficulties with their memory, and then what they sort of thought might be some signs of improvement, maybe even reversal. It's hard to know. I want, when we will talk more about that, Dean, but let me just ask you quick before we move on to Lisa Mosconi. Did the Zoom interactions, was that as effective as the in-person? And I think I know the answer, but this is the world in which we live nowadays. And I'm just, this is going to come up over and over again. How much of an impact did that have on those sessions?
Well, I would never have virtualized the intervention because I thought, incorrectly as it turned out, that it just wouldn't work as well, that it's a very high touch intervention, but I was wrong. It may be one of the few things that's come out of COVID, besides the fact that I get to spend more time at home with my family, not travel as much, as you can appreciate. But we've been doing it by Zoom and it's worked just as well. I had no idea it would work as well. And so it's actually opened up the possibility that now we can collaborate with other institutions. So we've been in conversations with Dr. Rudy Tanzi at Harvard, and Dr. Marwan Sabat, the Lou Ruvo Brain Health Center, that they can recruit the patients there, but we can do the intervention from here, because whether the patient lives across town or across the country doesn't matter anymore. And then we can recruit patients faster, we can finish the study sooner, and do it at lower costs. And then if it turns out that we can actually stop or reverse the progression of early stage Alzheimer's, which is still an open question, then we'll have an infrastructure in place that we can scale this very quickly and help people not only in this country, but even worldwide at a fraction of the cost. And yet it works, what we're finding, just as well as if we do it in person.
Right.
Thank you so much, Dean. I want to move over real quickly to Lisa Mosconi, who just wrote the best-selling book, The XX Brain. I was really happy to be able to write the foreword to that. I've done several pieces on Lisa for my work on NBC. And I think Lisa and Robbie also talking so much about hormones, about menopause, has really changed the conversation for millions of women who are now able to kind of hear this conversation in a new way. And this year, Lisa, you're going to talk about the long-term exposure of estrogen on women. And I just want to say, we also got a question from a woman, Diana in New York, who says, I'm a 39-year-old woman, and I don't know if taking hormone replacement therapy is the right or wrong thing for me to do in terms of putting me at risk for Alzheimer's as I near menopause. So many women looking at, do they have to make a choice between getting breast cancer if they go on hormones, or if they go on hormones, maybe protecting themselves against Alzheimer's? It's kind of this, twofold question. So you're going to look at it, how women are on it for a long term, correct?
Yes, that's right. So I think what we learned in these past years is that women's brains age differently than men's brains, and that menopause really plays a key role here for women. And we don't talk about this enough, but estrogen is not only involved in reproduction and having children, estrogen is also neuroprotective hormone. It literally gives energy to the brain by also shielding the brain from harm. So by using brain scans, we demonstrated that, like Robbie mentioned before, that many women show a decline in brain energy levels as they go through menopause. There's a change in the way that the brain processes energy substrates during this transition to menopause. And we also showed that some women start developing Alzheimer's plaques during their perimenopause and then the onset of menopause. So that's really important information to know because it gives us a timeline to start talking about Alzheimer's prevention in women earlier than we've been doing so far as a clinical community. But also it really speaks to things that women should know about themselves and their bodies and their brains and how to tackle that. So this year, thanks to WAM, one more time, thank you so much, we're looking into very practical information that women can put to their advantage. Because it is true that we've been doing so much work on menopause, but there's so much more to women than just menopause, right? So women women are exposed to estrogens throughout their entire lives. So what we want to better understand is what we want to really focus on women's entire reproductive history and find ways by which estrogen exposure may delay menopause, make it better, and also be protective against Alzheimer's disease. So we're now looking at things like age of puberty, age of menopause, reproductive pain, hysterectomies, oophorectomies. Number of children is something I'm really interested in looking into as being protective against Alzheimer's disease. And then, of course, hormonal replacement therapy and also oral contraceptives, for example.
But how do we educate? You know, Robbie's saying menopause is a neurological shift as well. Women don't really connect that. They just think, oh, I lost my period and now I'm cranky or I'm irritable, I'm having night sweats. They don't think about it as a neurological transition. And yet you see so many women being put on birth control and mimicking menopausal symptoms in their 20s. And the kind of, as you said, the long-term effect starting when you first go on the pill or, you know, this whole kind of decade by decade approach. What is a woman to do though, when she approaches, like this woman, Diana, when she's approaching perimenopause, what decisions does she make?
Right. Well, I think there's a lot of confusion around hormonal therapy and whether or not it's helpful for brain health and Alzheimer's disease prevention. I think that there are different reasons to take hormones for menopause or for prevention in some ways, right? And reducing hot flashes is one thing, but preventing Alzheimer's disease is quite another. And we need more research and more work to test hormonal therapy specifically for Alzheimer's prevention. And I think there are a few ways to go about it. We really need new hormonal formulations, and Dr. Brinton can really speak to this. I know she's been working on this for a long time. And we also need techniques that allow us, I think this is a big, huge missing link. We need techniques that allow us to see what hormonal therapy is doing in the brain. We don't have that, but thanks to you, 2019 was really all about developing this technique. 2020 was all about getting FDA approval to get started. And this year we are scanning. So we're finally going to be able to understand how hormonal therapy actually works in the brain and who can benefit from it and who might not be able to benefit from it, and when you should start and when you should stop. Because we really don't know yet. We need to do the research. We need to look at women's brains. And this is really important if you think that by the year 2030, 1.2 billion women will be in menopause all over the world. 1.2 billion. And many will suffer because of the menopause. So we really need to come to the rescue and help.
So that's why I think, Sanjay, it's so important when we talk about sex differences. You
Yeah.
know, they're so profound. And the questions, it's, you know, some people have said to me, well, you know, men get Alzheimer's too. I go, I know, my dad had Alzheimer's. I
Right.
get it. I'm with the program. But women, our research, as Janine Clayton was saying, is so far behind. We know so little. And so it's really worth, and some of the things we haven't researched at all. So a woman like me who goes to the doctor is met with, you know, over and over, like, we don't know, we don't know,
Right.
we don't have that research. So that's why this is so important. All right.
And how do you sort of assess the risk benefit ratio? Because I
Yeah.
think Maria, 20 years ago or so, it was one of the first stories that I covered. I remember watching you covering it as well. The nurses study that came out about HRT, hormone replacement therapy, and it made perfect sense, right? You start to have decreased production of certain hormones. If you replace those, might that be of benefit? And you found that it could potentially be of benefit, but could also increase certain risk factors for breast cancer and things like that. So balancing that all out, I mean, it's challenging for the medical profession, for someone who's trying to make that decision real time. I think it's got to be even obviously more challenging.
Yeah. It is. It's why I call many of these doctors going, help me, because nobody seems to know. I know you're going to talk to Laura, whose work is really exciting.
Lori Cox, congratulations to you as well. I am fascinated by the microbiome. We're learning so much about it. It seems like there's a new study every day. As a medical reporter, people are always sending us stories, and a large proportion of them involve the microbiome and the whole connection between the gut and the brain. I'm curious, specifically, I have a lot of questions for you, but let me just ask you, what are you specifically going to be looking at with regard to what we're talking about tonight, Alzheimer's?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sanjay. And I also want to say thank you so much, Maria Shriver and the WAM Foundation for the opportunity to do this work. You guys have been long supporters, and it's really making a big difference for us to get creative scientifically and sort of charge into new areas. So I'm a microbiologist, and I used to be studying obesity. And so I was really interested in metabolism, and that's how I found my way to Alzheimer's disease, the connection between microbes, metabolism, and the brain. And so I had a colleague who was looking at calorie restriction as a way to prevent Alzheimer's disease. And one of the things that she sort of very surprisingly found is that calorie restriction only protected the female mice in her study. And so this was really interesting, and we saw differences. But because we knew that metabolism, microbes, and the brain could all be connected, we also looked at what was changing in the gut microbiome. So we know that the brain ages, but it turns out the microbiome ages as well. And the calorie restriction was actually preventing some of these age-related changes in the gut microbiome. And we also found that the gut microbiome changed in aging differently in males and females. And so what we actually found is that calorie restriction was suppressing this bad microbe, which we've now been able to actually give to mice. And we showed that this microbe can accelerate plaque formation. So we really think that if you can change the microbiome, it might be a pathway to prevention. And that if we want to develop these sort of new third generation probiotics, we might need different ones for males and females.
Fascinating. I mean, just absolutely. That would not have come to me intuitively that it would be so different between men and women. So probiotics potentially useful and maybe even gender specific, are you saying?
Yes, that's correct. And so other researchers have found in other experiments, people have given antibiotics to Alzheimer's mice, and they find that antibiotics can clear the plaques, but only in males. And females don't get any protection at all. So we do think that there's going to be new probiotics that we can develop for Alzheimer's disease, and we think that they're going to be different for men and women. Now, these aren't, unfortunately, the probiotics that you can take over the counter today, but we do think that very soon we'll be able to identify the microbes and also the substances, the neuroprotective substances they produce, so that we can hopefully develop new therapeutics for Alzheimer's disease.
Is there something that today, could be helpful? I mean, just in terms of diet, then, are you finding some of these compounds in foods that, and again, and is that gender specific as well then for women versus men?
Yeah, so for diet, I always sort of take a step back and I say, do what your grandmother told you. Apple a day keeps the doctor away, eat your vegetables. And it turns out fiber is really important for promoting a healthy gut microbiome. So making sure you have enough fiber in your diet is very important. In our studies, we also did a 30% calorie restriction in carbohydrates specifically. So that is an approach, but I would say be very cautious. We worry about malnutrition and muscle wasting and aging. So it's always important to be cautious with calorie restriction. And then a third thing to look at are compounds or dietary elements that have antioxidant properties. And there are these things called polyphenols, and they seem to promote some of these good microbes as well. Polyphenols can be found, they're very bitter tasting. So they're in things like rock cranberry, and other things like that. And this camu powder, it's a fruit from Brazil with a lot of antioxidants and a lot of vitamin C. So I think those three things: fiber, potential of calorie restriction, but very cautiously, and potentially some antioxidants are ways to promote a healthy microbiome today.
Really interesting. Thank you. I got to tell you, Maria, I did a story on caloric restriction as a way to try and achieve greater longevity many years ago.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the things that one of the participants said to me is like, I'm not sure if this caloric restriction is going to make me live longer, but it sure feels like I'm living longer because you're always hungry.
Yeah, I know. Diet is
down.
it's so interesting, all of the different approaches here to diet, right? That we're talking about the American lifestyle, the American diet, and its effect on the brain. That to me is exciting, even though somewhat confusing, because sometimes you think plant, keto, calorie restriction, fasting, what's the right approach? But the idea that connecting what we eat in real time today is affecting our mental health and our cognitive health is so exciting. Richard Isaacson, so excited that you're here. Richard had his baby on his lap. So if the baby pops up, we know there's a baby. And I said, that just shows you how much the world has changed, that the person with the baby today is a man. But Richard, you're looking at women of color. We also know that women of color are disproportionately impacted by Alzheimer's. And we want to take a look through you at what are some of the misconceptions in the communities of color and how you're going to study that and how you can get better information and perhaps change lifestyle and address pre-existing conditions in communities of color.
Yeah, so when we started the Alzheimer's Prevention Clinic, years ago, we did a one-size-fits-all in terms of study everyone together. And then I met Maria Shriver, and she jabbed me, and she said, "Come on, you got to. Why aren't you studying women? Why is this happening?" And you changed the way I thought, and we redid everything, and then we studied men versus women when we started sex differences. And then with the events of the last year, not just COVID, but like everything, this new approach towards racial equity is so important. And what our study is going to do, we're going to actually do a bilingual study using an extremely diverse group of people. We include geriatric psychiatrists, neuroscientists, and neuropsychologists, not just from the United States, but around the world, Puerto Rico, United Kingdom, Barranquilla, Colombia. And what we do is we have experts that represent the people that we are going to try to study and improve their lives. We're going to try to help further our understanding of ethnic and racial factors in Alzheimer's disease. This is something that pushed me out of my comfort zone a little bit, and I'm learning literally on this project every day. Our goal is to, just like we try to put together a precision plan for people's health, precision medicine, personalizing, individualizing care, we need a precision communication plan for people for women of color. 2 out of every 3 brains affected by women are affected by Alzheimer's or women's brains. Women of color are even in higher risk. We need to then specifically address a roadmap for preventative care, communicate this, and really understand what the unique racial, ethnic, and cultural differences are, and then see if we can, give a targeted program to improve risk.
Why do you think that is? I mean, every time I've asked why 2 out of 3 cases of Alzheimer's are women, and then why is there an increase in women of color, Latino women? What do you suspect is the reason that? Is that pre-existing conditions? Is it health disparities? What is that?
So when I met you back in 2015, I said, I don't know. I said, I think it's something more than age. I do think it's something more, but I don't know. Over the last 5 years, I'm now able to answer this question. I believe that the perimenopause transition is absolutely a critical window of opportunity. The withdrawal of estrogen, that causes brain decline. That predicts Alzheimer's pathology. I mean, Dr. Mosconi and Dr. Brinton are here with us today. They've taught me that. Your work has taught me that. Also, there are unique risk factors, vascular risk factors, high cholesterol, diabetes, high blood pressure. These are unique vascular risk factors, but it's more complicated than that. There are genetic factors. Different people with different genes are going to have different outcomes. And what we need to do is really go down deep and understand why a specific woman is on the road to Alzheimer's disease and get them off that road. Because different women may be on, sitting in similar roads, but they may be, in the fast lane when a man is sitting in traffic. So I think I believe that we can intervene during the perimenopause transition. I do a perimenopause history on every single woman I see now. I ask about hot flashes. I ask about other complaints. I do a perimenopause history, and I've never done these things before. So I think we need to get to the root of the problem. We need to give a personalized plan, and we need to treat women of color differently based on their individual variabilities.
And we need to encourage physicians of color, right? Because so often people have told me, I'm looking for a physician that looks like me and that can speak to many of the pre-existing conditions that are in my community.
Yeah, and our team is expanded, not just in terms of diverse specialties, but truly diversity from Latin America, from African American. We have representation on our team so that we can precisely communicate. And I think this is really where we need to go.
Robbie,
go ahead.
I just curious, Robbie, you've been in kind of looking at women kind of longer almost than anybody, and you've been talking about precision medicine. For all the 2,000 people listening to this right now who might be sitting there, who might be perimenopausal, who might be menopausal, who might be type 2 diabetic, who might have hypertension, who might not have Alzheimer's in their family at all, or who might have, what are the 2 or 3 things they can do today that will take them maybe out of the escalator and put them into traffic?
Yeah. So I do think that there are a number of key elements that we can address. So I know Dr. Sanderlin talked about sleep. Sleep is the elixir of life. And I'm talking to the mirror here. But what I like to say is that we can do everything we ever did before. As we age, it just costs us more. Right? So we have to make certain that we build in recovery time, we build in sleep time, we build in the proper diet, and that all takes time and energy. And I think it's challenging for everyone during, in this 21st century to take time to care for ourselves. And I think that's one of the take-home messages for all of us is when we take care of ourselves, we are taking care of everyone else. So that's part one. Part two is for women, what our research has shown is that, as Dr. Mosconi mentioned, that it's not that, and that you talked about, it's not that women live longer than men. It's that women can start the disease earlier. We know it's a 20-year prodromal disease, has a 20-year prodromal phase. That means it starts 20 years, oftentimes before the diagnosis. But what I think is very, very important is that as WAM is focused on the prevention side, what can we do to prevent? And part of prevention, it's that we need to understand ourselves well enough to know when we're off our game. And if we're off our game, what do we do to actually move us back into optimal health, optimal performance? And that's really comes back to something that Dr. Eichsenson was talking about, this precision health, this precision medicine. And part of what we're really focused on in another project is precision hormone therapy. What's the right therapy for the right woman at the right time? And that's been, a project that we've been working on for a number of years, and hopefully we will have answers in the not too distant future. So I think the 3 take-home messages is care for yourself like you care for yourself. And that, that you are sensitive to those early indicators, not when there's disability, but in fact, what's the early indicator that you need medical intervention? You know, and third, if there are risk factors in your family for Alzheimer's disease, to really think about how best to interface with the medical profession, to best ask, I know, how I can change my trajectory. Dr. Ornish has been talking about that for a long time. And last, you know, join a clinical trial. We're going to start a clinical trial to regenerate the Alzheimer's brain, funded by the National Institute on Aging. So we have lots of opportunities now. We have lots.
Where do they join that trial? Where do they join that trial?
So we'll start recruiting in March next month, and we'll have a website and a Facebook page, and we'll be ready to go. So it's called Regen the Brain, Regen Brain, Regenerate.
Brain. There you go, Sanjay, regen the brain. I'm
love
going to
it.
go on to that. But I think that's, you know, I think as everybody here has been talking about looking at specific areas that can help people in real time, what we also need are people to step up and be a part of clinical trials in real time. Women of color, women of different ages, and also simultaneously, Sanjay, debunking, that's why your book is so great, debunking the myths that people say like, well, Alzheimer's doesn't run in my family, so I don't have to worry about it. Or isn't that something that's just a natural form of aging? Or isn't that something I'm supposed to worry about when I'm 80? I think all of these summits, the education, which is a big part of WAM's mission, is to educate people about what we know today, what you can do today, and that your brain is just like, you know, your bicep, your tricep, or your thighs. As I always say, that if women spent as much time thinking about their brain as they did about their thighs or their breasts or something, we kind of like take a hold of this, you know. But it's, I think, a real huge, massive re-education component to this disease.
Yeah, I think there's no question. And I think, you know, people have often thought of the brain as just this black box, I think, right?
Yeah.
You know, measured by its inputs and its outputs. And it's only been recently, I think, as everyone has mentioned, that we could start to really peer inside and image in a way that was meaningful, you know, that can help guide some of these studies, guide some of the precision medicine Dr. Diaz is talking about. I think it's really fascinating. And it's not preordained that you're going to develop this disease.
Yeah.
No matter, I mean, the number of people who just live with that concern, I mean, if nothing else, they could be inspired that this is not preordained. You don't want to sound overly euphemistic in terms of what you can promise, but the news can be far more encouraging than I think people realize.
Yeah, and I think that's, go ahead.
Actually, just one thing. What is, I think it's, Maria, you mentioned this earlier, that there are thousands of us scientists at the discovery level, the translational level, and the clinical level, all working, you know, day after day, year after year on this problem. And we are at the threshold. We are there. There's been a lot of failures. There's been a lot of disappointments. But what you haven't seen is the entire, you know, army of scientists and clinicians who have been working painstakingly for decades. We're here, we're on it. It's going to be cured.
I want to thank you all so much for your extraordinary work, all of you. We're so glad to be funding. We're so appreciative to all the people who support WAM so that we can fund these seed grants to get you up and going, and to look at lifestyle intervention, and to look at areas that perhaps hadn't been looked at before. When I got involved with Alzheimer's, people were all focused on plaques and tangles. And now that's kind of really opened up, and people are looking in so many different places. And the word prevention is now part of the conversation. And I think that's so incredibly exciting. I'm going to wrap this up because Sanjay has to go back on the air. I want to remind people about Sanjay's great new book, right? Keep Sharp, Build a Better Brain at Any Age. We all want to do that. And that means any age. So if you have adult children, they can build a better brain. And, and if you have a parent in a memory care facility, so many people come up to me all the time. I think you've learned a lot about diet and lifestyle today. You have impact in how that memory care facility deals with your parents. So you have a lot more power than you realize. I like to say that to people all the time who tell me, could you go and help me with this memory care facility? And I say, you pay the bills. You can actually have a voice at that memory care facility. It's really important. So Sanjay, I want to thank you for reiterate what Robbie Britton said to you before we went on. Your reporting on COVID has been incredible. Your friendship is sustaining to me, and I really appreciate it. And this book is really spectacular. So I want to thank you for that and for all of your incredible work.
Maria, thank you so much, Maria. I'm so happy that you're in the world. I just, it's sometimes, this past year has been a tough year, I think, for people. And you are a bright spot that I think of often when I need a little cheering up. I consider myself part of WAM, but also part of which is the Maria movement.
Thank you, Sanjay. Well, call me anytime. I'm free.
I'll call you. We'll Zoom.
Thank you. Go back on the air. I want to thank everybody for joining the summit today. We're going to leave you with a video about what WAM does. You saw today about all the scientists that we fund, the research that we do. We do a lot of educational efforts. We do a lot of other things. I hope you'll give us 2 minutes and take a look at what we're doing 24/7 out on what I call the front lines of humanity. Take a look. Thanks, Sanjay.
Thank you, Maria.
It is a relentless beast.
I was 36 years old when my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. It felt like my world was ending.
I mean, there's some days I don't even get out of bed till 11 or 12 o'clock. I think my kids feel like they've lost a little bit of me, and they're scared.
Our mission at the Women's Alzheimer's Movement is to understand why every 65 seconds a new brain develops Alzheimer's, why 2 out of 3 of them belong to women, and why women of color are at an even higher risk. By 2050, Alzheimer's will claim the minds of 16 million Americans. We are facing a national epidemic that has put women's brains at risk, and I believe that it will be women's brains who will turn the tide. WAM exists to move the needle for women and Alzheimer's. One way is by funding gender-based research at leading institutions.
WAM has absolutely been imperative to help us press the fast forward button on Alzheimer's research.
We convene summits that gather the smartest minds to educate the general public about brain health and Alzheimer's prevention. We advocate at the highest levels for national and state Alzheimer's funding and partner with corporate and community leaders to develop policies that help families impacted by Alzheimer's. And now we're on the ground providing women-based services. In a historic first, WAM has partnered with the Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health to open the Women's Alzheimer's Movement Prevention Center at the Cleveland Clinic. From the initial Shriver report informing the nation for the first time that women were more likely to get Alzheimer's than men, to every other media platform since, WAM has educated people about how to become change makers in their own homes, communities, and places of business. At WAM, we believe Alzheimer's can be stopped, but only if we invest in research. Only if we push government and business leaders to respond more urgently and creatively to this crisis. And only if we all take charge of our physical and cognitive health and the health of our loved ones.
We're going to beat this disease. We're going to protect our brains. We're going to figure out why this happens, and we're going to intervene early. That's the future of Alzheimer's.
The Women's Alzheimer's Movement is committed to ending Alzheimer's. The more we push, the more the needle will move. So join us at WAM and help change the future for women and Alzheimer's, one woman at a time.